There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello, BookTube. I'm Sean Breeze Books. Welcome back to my channel and another Friday Reads. I have had quite the week, so I don't have a lot of reading stuff to tell you about. But I have some personal news, which may or may not be of interest, but it was rather dramatic, at least one of them, in my life in the last 7 days. And I have my dear friend from college, my college days, Daryl, who I told you about reconnecting with him about a year and a half ago, is visiting, and he asked to stay an extra night, which was great, except I am now not really prepared to do a Friday read, so this one is going to be a flying by the seat of my pants type of Friday reads, which hopefully we'll still get to you sometime Friday. Do you know what nabe is if you like Japanese food? Do you know what nabe is? Nabe is basically Japanese hot pot. And we had nabe parties a lot when Kenji and I lived together in Tokyo. And I have a donabe pot, clay pot that you put on a little tabletop burner with a gas can, and you cook it on the table and everybody dips into it. And basically hot pot. And so we wanted to do it here this autumn, this fall, and into the winter. I brought the donabe pot from Japan, but I couldn't find it. And that's not, I'm going to make this very short. Look for it in boxes that hadn't been unpacked, and this box and that box. And finally, I said to Kenji, I didn't really take a good look in the Lazy Susan big cupboard in the kitchen. He looked, he said, it's right there, for God's sakes. So that happened. But then we didn't have the little portable burner with the gas can, so went out and bought that, a brand new one. And then Saturday, before the nabe party Sunday night, wanted to test everything out. And we couldn't get it lit. Kenji couldn't get it lit. I couldn't get it lit. And my mom stopped by, and she couldn't get it lit. And then I said, oh, here's a little button. What happens if I press unlock? And as soon as I pressed that button, I think it said unlock, you could hear the hissing of the gas. And okay, we're in business. And I lit it, and it exploded in the kitchen. The fire went almost up to the roof, and we couldn't get it out. This whole thing was probably 90 seconds, but it felt to me like it was 20 minutes. It was burning higher and higher, and we threw pots of water on it, nothing. Just panicking. So finally, after about 35 seconds, Mum said, call the fire department and go next door, see if they have a fire extinguisher, because of course we didn't have one. So I was running with the phone in my ear to the next door neighbor. I said, we have a fire, to the next door neighbor. And I mean, in a townhouse, it's all one building, people. It scared the living daylights out of her, I'm sure. And she didn't have a fire extinguisher. Meanwhile, I called 911, the emergency, and I was on hold. Lovely to live in North America where nothing works and everything is shitty. So I was on hold for the fire department. And then I walked back inside, and Kenji had the presence of mind to take a big dish towel, wet, and then he could flap it out with the wet dish towel. So it was out. But just scared the bejesus out of us, but especially me. It took me 24 hours to recover from that trauma. But we're so lucky. The only damage was Kenji's laptop, which was a hand-me-down from me. The screen, I think it's the protective layer of the screen, got burnt. And then there was lots of water on it. So I imagine that it's toast. And there was an overhead light fixture, and half of the light bulbs had melted and warped, but still worked. And that's really it. I had a pile of new books stacked up. When new books come into my house, I like to sit them on the kitchen table so I can play with them and flip through them quite intensively for the first few days before they come up here on this pile, which is getting unwieldy. But they was far enough from the flames. The only thing that got burnt was, look at this receipt sticking out of one of them. That's the only damage to my books. I'm relieved. Anyway, we bought a fire extinguisher. We bought one of those fire blankets. And we're never going to use a indoor burner with a gas can, ever. So for the nabe party the next night, Kenji used the clay donabe hot pot on the stovetop, and it worked out just fine. Jesus Christ. The other one is more comic. Tuesday night, I had just finished teaching at 9 p.m. I teach Japanese students on Zoom a couple nights a week, and this was my big night where I had 3 classes back to back, and I just finished, and Kenji came out of the bathroom up here, and he said, the water's off. What's going on with the water? So we tested all through the house. The water was off. It had just started. We both used the toilet within 30 minutes before. Kenji just done a load of laundry, and there was no problem, and suddenly it was off. So we looked up the city to see if there's any problems, and we phoned the city 24-hour hotline. There were no reported water outages in our neighborhood, and then we phoned the emergency line for our condo association, and she was very helpful, and she said, no, it's not in any of the other houses, so it must be something in your place. So we spent a good 12 hours without water overnight, and that was lots of fun, as you can imagine. And then they sent over their plumber. And I'd had this niggling theory. Just like I'd had this niggling theory that the Nishnaabe pot was back in that big cupboard, but I never checked it. I'd always think of it when I wasn't there, and that's where it was. I'd had this little niggling theory that turned out to be true, because the plumber came over. He was really cute. Kenji was at work, and he went down to the water pipe, and he took one look at it, and he said, somebody turned the water off. The switch had been turned this way, which meant that the water was off, and if it's this way, the water's on. And I knew which switch it was, but stupid me, Kenji is forgiven. He's the one that did it. Must have probably just bumped it with his laundry basket, carrying the clean clothes up. But I should have checked. We haven't got the plumber's bill, but hopefully they won't impose too harsh of a fee on us for our ignorance. So that's the kind of week it's been. And now I have company and haven't had time to read for a couple days. So that's my personal check-in, and I am delighted. I don't usually talk about book prizes because all the other booktubers, or so many other booktubers, do. Why do you need me to talk about them? I don't really care about them all that much, but I am delighted with the news today that this Indigenous novel won the Governor General's Award in Canada for their fiction prize. Small Ceremonies by Kyle Edwards. I featured this in my most recent, several months ago, but my most recent library book vlog, and quite liked the opening to the novel, and it won. Kyle Edwards is an Anishinaabe journalist from the Lake Manitoba First Nation, and he is a journalist and a professor at the University of Southern California. So congratulations, and I'm looking forward to reading this one. All right, that's actually a good segue into this week's mystery guest. My first Indigenous writer that I've had featured on my channel, which is strange. And let's go meet them. And this week's mystery guest is Patty Krawick. And Patty is an Anishinaabe Ukrainian writer and speaker belonging to the Lac-Sioux First Nation in Treaty 3 territory and residing in Niagara Falls. And she is also a founding director of the, is it Nikanagana? Nikanagana of the Nikanagana Foundation, which challenges settlers to pay their rent for living on Indigenous land, an idea that is really interesting to me, and author of 2 books, and we're here to especially talk about her book that launches tomorrow as of the date of this recording, and that is Bad Indians Book Club.
Isn't she beautiful? I love her.
She is, absolutely. I want to hear all about the cover. And the subtitle is Reading at the Edge of a Thousand Worlds, published by Goose Lane Editions, one of my favorite independent publishers. Patty, welcome.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I love being a mystery guest.
That's great, and I'm really excited for our conversation. And I should, in the spirit of what Patty has already taught me, because I have read a good deal of the introduction, and I'd like her to tell us about the importance of locating yourself and saying where you come from, saying who you belong to. And so in that spirit, I wish I had all this in my head, but I don't. I would like to acknowledge that I am living on Treaty 6 territory in Saskatoon, and that encompasses the lands of the Cree, Dakota, Nakota, Saulteaux, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. Patty, tell us about this book. I don't know, what kind of a book is it? Is it a book?
So people who get advanced copies put reviews up on Good Minds and NetGalley and stuff. And a couple of people have said, like, they don't even know how to review the book because they don't even know what category it fits in. Is it lit crit? Is it memoir? Is it fiction? Because there's serialized flash fiction threaded throughout the book. I like to think of it as a manifesto on reading. And the power of reading to change the world. If we read intentionally, we read radically, we examine the thoughts, because where it came from, the Kyle who's mentioned at the beginning, and for all the Kyles in your life, who wanted to know what book I would recommend to help them understand or get a little better picture of what Indigenous people thought, of Indigenous thought, Indigenous life. And I was like, wow, what a big question. And they asked me this like in November. And so my thoughts started turning towards a New Year's resolution based on reading, which I've done a few times. If I'm trying to understand a group that I don't have a lot of contact with in my normal life, or I just want to understand their perspective, I will dedicate a year to deliberately reading from that group and reading all kinds of stuff. Like we always have our favorite authors, like God bless Robin Wall Kimmerer. I love her work. But for so many people, Braiding Sweetgrass, which is a wonderful book, is the beginning and end of their Indigenous reading. And we write and think about so many things. And so I started thinking, okay, in January, you're going to read this about why Indigenous literatures matter. And then in February, we're thinking about history. So here's a bunch of history books. And so the Twitter thread came, and it's the only dead name I'll ever use, went a little wild. So I thought, is there interest in a book club? And that also generated a lot of interest. There were far too many people were interested than was manageable for a book club. So I created this series of panel discussions where I brought together authors and readers. And that was a lot of fun. And some of the readers were a little intimidated about being on a panel with the people they were reading, but it all worked out and we had some really great conversations. And that's where the book came from. The book actually emerged out of those conversations. So I collapsed a few of them and then I added some chapters on things because we really didn't talk about fiction very much. And we also expanded the category, not just of Indigenous, but just of who we were going to think about it. Because now I'm thinking about who are the other people who are pushed to the margins? Communities that we don't tend to listen to. There's that saying about the single story, right? That we all have this single story. And whatever community you're part of, you know that the single story being told about your community is wrong, that it's not true, that it's in service to the nation building project of Canada. But somehow we seem to think that the single stories being told of other communities must be true because that's all we hear. So what if we all just hung out on the edges that we've been shoved to and read each other's stuff and talked to each other? What becomes possible? And that's the idea of the thousand worlds. Reading at the edge of a thousand worlds, which comes from the Zapatista concept of a world in which many worlds can coexist. And so there are thousands of worlds out there just waiting to be born, just waiting to emerge. Not in a way of taking over, not in that kind of Christian nationalist one world to which it's not the Borg, right? Like we're not going to assimilate everybody. It's a world where all of these emerging worlds can coexist with each other, where we can share space and still have our own way of existing. And I thought, isn't that beautiful? And the best way to do that is to read the people who are doing that stuff in the margins, not the people who are, because everybody in all of our communities, like we got Native people shilling for pipelines. There are some tribes in the US that came out really hard for Donald Trump. So we don't want to listen to the people who are trying to get access to a house that's on fire, as James Baldwin wrote, right? I don't want access into a house that's on fire. I want my own house. I want to do something else. And so that's where that title came from. That's where the idea of the podcast series came from. That's where the book came from, is what if we just listen to and talk to each other? And a lot of people don't know where to start. Like my friend Kyle, where do I start? And I gave them like a whole pile of books, which is not a good place to start. That's intimidating, which might be why they didn't read any of the books actually, because it's intimidating to be presented with here's a whole syllabus. Like, and so Bad Indians Book Club, I hope, will become that place of beginning for people who don't know where to start.
So, among all the other things that it is it a reading guide?
Because it's also very much my own thought. It's my own bookshelf, literally. Like that's where the books came from, was my own bookshelf. So it's not like some kind of survey of in some Indigenous canon, right? I don't even talk about Vine Deloria or Gerald Weisner or, Cisco or Hard, any of those people, because they weren't what was on my bookshelf, which has since been remedied. But so these are books written by people that I've talked to, people that I've had podcast conversations with, people that I've engaged with on social media. And then it's my own reflections on how these things fit together. And so I hope that it's more of a model. In his foreword, Omar Al-Akkad said that it does form a very refreshing syllabus. It could be taught, and I hope that it is taught. Becoming kin is taught in schools and universities, which is really cool. I would love to see this taught in literature courses, but I also hope that it just leads to more curiosity. Yeah, I do want to know more about what Indigenous people, marginalized people doing science. I do want to know more about their perspective on science. So I'm going to look for queer voices who are writing about science. I'm going to look for, I hope it provokes that kind of curiosity, and then people come to their own conclusions. So I think of it more as a model than a syllabus.
And this is almost a ridiculous question, but would it be a good book club book?
You know what? I think it would be a great book club book. And we are coming out with a discussion guide that's not available yet, but there will be a discussion guide. Becoming Kin was a great book club book. Every chapter ended with a task. This one doesn't do quite the same thing. It has podcasts that people can listen to. Actually, the podcast has been remastered and is in the process of being released. Dr.
Okay.
Eve Tuck's visiting lab at Lenape-Hoking has generously provided support for Tiffany Hill to do that work. So yeah, if people want to just put Bad Indians Book Club in their podcast app, they can listen to the conversations. It has released now, so it's over the next 8 weeks.
Great.
Conversations that are reorganized according to the chapters, renamed and reorganized according to the chapters of the book that's available now. I think it would be a great book club book just because there's a lot for people to grapple with in each chapter and to think
Uh,
about and to talk about how our perspective differs from perhaps the one they grew up with.
Now, probably you'll only need a minute to answer this question, but I know that there's going to be people watching saying, Indians? I thought that was politically incorrect to say. So, what's your answer to that?
Oh my gosh, Indians is one thing, it's a legal designation. Yeah, I'm really dark. I'm gonna plug my light in here so that people can see my beautiful face. There. Oh,
Yeah.
look,
Oh,
wrinkles,
that's
bags, and all. There I am.
even more
Um,
lovely than you thought at first.
there you go. Yeah. So Indian is a legal designation. My status card says that I am a registered Indian. The Indian Act of Canada is still a thing. So it's a legal term. It requires certain blood quantum, which is like 19th century race science, and yet still has legal ramifications. Because what is blood? That's a whole different conversation. So Indian, to me, it's also a little bit of defiance because even people from India weren't Indians. That's not what they called themselves. They're Bangalorean, they're
Yeah.
Punjabi, she's Punjabi. And so they have all of these different cultures, different communities. And what happened was even I think it was in the 14th century, the Europeans showed up and were like, "Oh, people of the Indus Valley, we're just going to call you Indians," because they could. So it really is a global term for the local people we can't be bothered to get to know. That just seems to be how it's used globally. Because you got Indians in South America, you got just Vietnam, North Vietnam was called Indian country. Geronimo was Osama bin Laden, so we're also kind of code for the bad guys. But yeah, so I see Indian as I use it in a defiant way, as this is what you thought, I'm going to be something else. I'm going to be a bad Indian. Actually, I was just being mad one day when I put that in the book, this little line about being a bad Indian, because I'm not going to live up to the colonizers' expectations. I'm not going to even live up to the hippy dippy liberal, we're all one people with their own kind of fetishizing of Indigenous people. And there's all kinds of terms. There's Indigenous, which is also a political term like refugee, migrant, citizen. It describes our relationship with the state. We were here first, and then the colonial state came on top of us. People in the US particularly use like Native American. In Canada, you don't hear Native Canadian as much. Kay Trask, actually, she's a Native Hawaiian. She was a Native Hawaiian educator or like professor and activist. And she used Native Hawaiian to remind people that she was native to that place. She used it as a political statement, whereas others like Keolu Fox will call themselves Kanaka Maoli because that's their own name for themselves. So there's all these big umbrella terms that all mean different things for different reasons. Chances are, whichever one you use, somebody's going to correct you. They're going to be like, no, we're First Nations. You can, damn it, Patty said Indigenous. So whatever you get corrected to, just say, okay, thank you. Because they're all right and they're all wrong. If you know the person's tribe, like you wouldn't say French, you wouldn't say European if you meant French. you wouldn't talk about the European president of France. You would talk about the French president of France. And it's the same with us. You wouldn't. So just if you know our tribe, use it. If you don't, then use one umbrella term, and it may or may not be accepted by the person. Yeah, that's a really long answer. You said 1 minute.
No, that's a much better answer than it would have been with 1 minute. Thank you. And I believe that there are a series of fictional stories, or maybe that's not the right word.
Yes.
Tell
Nope.
us a bit about that thread in the book.
Yeah, this is a funny story. When I originally pitched Bad Indians Book Club, it wasn't called that. It was just meant to be a survey of Indigenous, like it emerged from this podcast series. And I had been talking with a friend of mine about Dear Woman, and she shows up in a lot of different cultures around the world, right? Like a lot of animist cultures have some kind of Dear Woman figure or a reindeer figure or some kind of shape-shifting figure that's based on hoofed animals. And so I wanted to do research on that and weave that into the story because just to show how all of our stories have some common ground but aren't exactly the same because they emerge from the places that they're written in. And then I discovered that I actually don't like doing that kind of research. But I had promised my editors something with Dear Woman in it as a thread. And then I had read Chelsea Vowell's Buffalo is the New Buffalo. And Chelsea wrote, it's a short story collection, but every short story has like a little 1 or 2 page essay about the social issues that she's discussing in that story. And I thought, that's really cool. So I'm going to do the inverse of that. I'm going to discuss social issues from the perspective of various writers and then write a little piece of flash fiction to navigate and provide some kind of thread. Because otherwise, it's just these like random essays that sort of hang together, but it provides this kind of common thread that ties them all together. And I mean, it was Dear Woman because that was what I had promised my editor, but also she's been showing up for me in all kinds of ways, not just on Reservation Dogs, but like I got deer on my backyard. She's showing up in other books that I'm reading. And you got to look for the medicine that shows up. She was showing up. What's she trying to teach me? And writing fiction about her was a lot of fun. I just made her up. This isn't any kind of traditional or official Dear Woman story. This is very much in the tradition of Nishnaabe storytelling where we just make stuff up. And she was a lot of fun to write about and to think through how does she respond to this and to move her from one place to the next. And sometimes she just reflected the place where I was. Like I was in Prince Edward Island, so I put her there. I was in Belize, so I put her there. And I don't know, I might try my hand at a whole novel, see what she gets up to, because I really like her. But flash
Except
fiction was also a really good discipline because it's 1,000 words. So how do I write a short story in 1,000 words that stands alone, but also connects with the other stories? And so that was a real challenge, and that was a lot of fun.
2 more questions on this book, Bad Indians Book Club. The penultimate one is, I'm imagining that you're hoping that we're not just going to read the book, but that we're going to do stuff because we've read the book, not only reading. It's a call to activism.
Yes. Yes. You want to know what the call to activism is?
Yes,
It's right
please.
it's right at the end of the introduction. There's 2 things that I want people to do. I want them to read collectively. So not just individually, which is great. I do most of my reading individually, but also collectively so that you're talking with other people about the ideas in the book. And then you're taking those ideas into the places where you work or worship or spend time with. And you're thinking about the policies in that place. You're thinking about why are we choosing this book instead of that book? But also, I want people to get involved with this whole banned book thing because we're always hearing, like, just in Alberta, they tried to, and then there was like this massive uproar over these books that were being banned. And I think she walked it back, if I'm not mistaken. I think she walked it back.
It's only visual representations of sex that are banned.
Yeah. Oh my God. And I got that idea from Miriam Kaba because she was talking about people walking around with these tote bags saying, I read banned books. And she was like, who cares? Who cares? Get involved with the places where they're being banned. Get on those school boards and the library boards and the places where these decisions are being made. Why are we ceding that space to people who are banning books? We should be in those places keeping them on the shelves. I would love for school teachers and librarians to take Bad Indians Book Club and look at their own shelves, look at their own bookshelves for who's there, who's being emphasized, whose stories are being told. Are you telling the story of a people without even including those people? Right? Who is your source material? And when you're teaching in the classroom, I would like people who are working in the various fields that come up in the book to take like that book on science, if you work in the science field or in the medical profession or those places, and to think, who am I relying on for my knowledge about how to treat various communities? What is my curriculum as a nursing student? My son is a nursing student in Halifax right now, and he's looking, what's in my curriculum? Who am I learning from? What assumptions are being made about the people I'm working with? Or if you work with the unhoused population or anywhere, the chapter on gender, what are my assumptions about gender that I can challenge as a result of these people that I've been listening to and reading? And yeah, so it is very much the book changes me. Now I need to go out and do something. But just pick one or two things. Don't be overwhelmed with all of the need out there. I always say, do the thing that's in front of you with the people who are with you and trust that other people are doing the same. Don't worry about trying to change everything. Just pick one thing and change it.
I'm vibrating in my seat here, so this is wonderful. Tell us more about this fabulous cover.
Isn't she wonderful? So yeah, Nicole J. Hatfield is a Comanche artist, and she was recommended to me by my friend Weyodi Oldbear, whose book, As Many Ships as Stars, I talk about in the chapter of Futurism. It's a wonderful story about some spaceship stealing Comanches who go to outer space. And if you like space opera and science fiction, if you would love, absolutely love As Many Ships as Stars, because the Comanche actually have a long history of horse stealing. They became amazing. And so this just takes their history into the future. It's really a very cool book. So she recommended Nicole Hatfield, and I was looking through her stuff, and I saw a few that I liked. But this is a painting of Wanata Parker, and she is Quanah Parker's daughter. And so I emailed Weyodi to see if she knew anything about Wanata Parker, if she would be a bad Indian, because I just love the look on her face. She's just done with everybody's nonsense. And she says, yeah, I know about her. She was my great aunt. So at the end of the book, there's a little bit about Wanata Parker that Weyodi wrote. She was, in fact, a bad Indian. The family gave consent for their relative's image to be used as the book cover for a book called Bad Indians Book Club. She was a bad Indian. She sounded like a wonderful human being who lived until 1970. So I was 5 years old when she passed. So she's not that long ago. And we tend to put Indians way back in ancient history, right? Like we tend to think of them as being like from this long ago vanished era. But Quanah Parker's daughter lived until 1970, which isn't that long ago, really. Okay, for millennials and Gen Zers, it might be, but for me, it's not. So yes, I absolutely love that painting. I love being able to promote Nicole and Weyodi's work because they're just such great human beings who do such good work. But yeah, I love that picture. I love the colors, love the look on her face.
So I asked you in advance if I could ask you this question. You said yes. So here is the question. You are an Anishinaabe Ukrainian writer. Is there or should there be a Bad Ukrainians book club?
And you know what? Maybe there should. I'm not the person who could write that. I was raised in my maternal family. They tried so hard to make me a proper Ukrainian. And I was the brown kid in the white family. Whenever we hung out with their Ukrainian friends, I didn't look like any of them. So that never felt like me. Although I love my grandparents dearly, they took such good care of my mom and I. So it's absolutely no shade to my grandparents or to the Ukrainian community. It just never felt like mine. Yeah, because being a bad Indian is about refusing to go along with who other people think you ought to be. And that's going to look different ways depending on what community you're from.
Sure.
Right? There should be a bad white people's book club where white people reject the overarching narrative of whiteness and kind of reclaim being Irish and Scottish and German and Welsh and all those things that are subsumed under this whiteness, that just this kind of racial category that seems to think it's better than everybody else. But I would love to see a bad white people book club where people are turning on these assumptions about how we are supposed to exist and reject that. Bad men's book club, bad white women's book club, like all of those things where we reject these assumptions that are put on us that don't actually serve any of us. Right? Because it doesn't do any of my son gave me this really great way of thinking about colonialism as disconnecting us from our histories.
Yeah.
That's what it does. It disconnects us from our histories. And so part of rejecting that colonial narrative is reclaiming our history. And that's what bad Indians do. We reclaim our history. And so, yeah, maybe there's room for Ukrainians and Germans and white people and men and all of that to reject this severing of history and reclaim who you are. And your own stories contain all of that information. You don't need to lean on ours. You can look to your own stories and reimagine them differently, look at them differently. Like even I was just talking with somebody yesterday, even the biblical creation story, which has there's day and night and water and land, and it seems to create this world of binaries, except that it doesn't, because you go from day to sunset to night to dawn. Like non-binary is written into the creation story in Genesis. It's a non-binary story, but we forget that. Like we've got land and water, but you've also got swamps and mangrove things and beaches and all of these places of layered relationship. And that's written right into that story, but it's not told that way. So that's what I mean. We can look back into our own stories and reclaim them and rehear them in different ways and then push that narrative forward. And that's what bad Indians do.
I'm starting to levitate here. More briefly, tell us about your first book, because it sounds fabulous too. It's called Becoming Kin, an Indigenous call to unforgetting the past and reimagining our future.
Yeah, so Becoming Kin, I wrote because I got mad. There was a sermon in church about how we're all the same in Jesus, and it started off with a joke about trans people and how identity politics is out of control and we're all the same in Jesus. And I got so mad because I felt erased as well. Not as a trans person, but just if trans people can't show up as their authentic selves, nobody can. None of us are safe. And so that made me really mad because here's this church that built itself, it's in a place named after the people who were displaced so that it could exist. That's what are you doing? You're not like it's in your name. You're still not thinking about what happened. So I wrote this article for Sojourners magazine, and then Valerie from Broadleaf messaged me on Twitter saying, "Have you ever thought of writing a book?" And I was like, "I am now." Because we get really tired of having to answer the same questions all the time. And so Becoming Kin was okay, let's examine our history. Let's examine it. Let's look at it from the moment of landing to right up today. And what are the ideas that have been perpetuated from 500 years ago that fueled all the various displacements and relocations and reservations and residential schools and child welfare and policing? Because the same ideas just keep getting recirculated in new ways. And then what can we do about it? And so that's why each chapter there ends with a task of, and so people think Becoming Kin is going to be like this great book about how to make friends with the Indians. And then what they get is a book about how to become the kind of people that we want to be friends with.
I love that. Do you
Yeah,
recommend do you recommend readers start with that and then come to Bad Indians Book Club, or the order doesn't matter?
I don't think the order matters. Becoming Kin is very much about history. It's very much about history and the political realities as a result of the history. Bad Indians Book Club expands on that quite a bit because it looks at other areas that people are reading and interested about too. I think it just really depends on what you're interested in. If you're really interested in history and politics, then Becoming Kin would be a great place to start. If you're more interested in examining your bookshelf and why you read the things you read and how you might be able to read more broadly, then Bad Indians Book Club would be the better place to start.
It's great. Patty, what are you working on now?
Right now, I'm working on launching this book.
Yeah.
I do have a blog, thousandworlds.ca, where I'm working through Ojibwe texts, so Ojibwe stories that were documented in 1906. I'm working my way through these stories and just I'm taking my evangelical Bible study brain and applying it to Ojibwe stories. What did these stories teach us about how to live well in the world? And how do they interrupt a lot of our current narratives? So that's what I'm working on right now. I have actually started writing a fiction of Quay. I do want to see what happens with her. But I don't know what I'm doing. I've never written fiction other than these flash fictions. So we'll have to see what happens with that.
Wait.
So I think this is just the right time to start playing with this fiction.
All right. So, Patty, what books would you like to recommend to us?
Okay, first off will be Leanne Simpson's A Theory of Water. Absolutely love this book. I had the pleasure of hearing her talk about it at the Socialism Conference in 2024 in Chicago. It's this wonderful book, and she starts off by talking about sintering. And sintering is a thing that snowflakes do because she talks about working with a snowmobile to flatten cross-country trails in Peterborough. She lives in Peterborough. I don't know why my son isn't friends up with her yet. I'm very distraught about that because he lives in Peterborough. But she talks about sintering. And what sintering is when snowflakes fall and they land on other snowflakes, they change their shape and their composition. They change in order to connect with the other snowflakes, and that's how you get snowpack. And so she does this throughout the book. She's talking about all water from a Nishnaabe point of view and through Nishnaabe knowledge and storytelling. This is how we should be living when we connect with each other, because snowflakes, they change in order to connect. And we should not be living as these individual, unique snowflakes. We need to be thinking about sintering, which means thinking about who we're sintering with. Right? That becomes now your community becomes very important because you are being changed by your community. And so you have to think very carefully about how you're going to allow that change to take place. So yes, Leanne Simpson's A Theory of Water. It's a beautiful read. And then this other book is one that's kind of well worn. I read it a lot. It's Adrienne Maree Brown's Fables and Spells. My son recommended it to me, and I do read it a lot. It's a collection of poetry or spells, if you want. If you want to engage with the natural world with spiritual intent. That's how she defines, witching and spell casting. So you can read it as poetry, you can read it as spells, but there's also a lot of short stories in there. And so this is a great, very kind of accessible book if you want something that you can just pick up and put down, because it's all self-contained, like they're all stories. And then there's beautiful poetry. I talk about them both in Bad Indians Book Club. There's a lovely exchange between Adrienne Maree Brown and the dinosaur at the Chicago O'Hare Airport. And it's told as a conversation over a period of years. When I was traveling to the US, which I'm not right now because my politics will get me in a lot of trouble, really, you should live your life so that you can't travel in the US right now.
Absolutely.
But when I was traveling through the US, I did go through O'Hare a lot. And if you're in the right terminal, you do see the dinosaur. And I do make a point now of saying hi to him whenever I went through. And so far, he hasn't responded, but maybe I'm just not listening correctly. Yes, A Theory of Water and Fables and Spells would be my two books.
Those are great, and I look forward to reading more about them in Bad Indians Book Club. What an amazing conversation this has been. I can't wait to read the book and maybe start my own book club, probably online with some other booktubers, and read it
I would
together.
love it. I would
Yeah,
love to see book clubs just everywhere.
absolutely. And I hope that I can have you back someday,
For
Patty.
sure. This was a wonderful conversation.
Thank you so much. I actually talked to Patty in our chat before I turned the recorder on. I said, I am really into Indigenous literature and Indigenous history, but I have been shy about having an Indigenous guest because I am worried as a stupid white guy that I'm going to say the wrong thing. And so I've shied away from doing it. It's ridiculous. And she said, oh, Sean, we're just people. Everybody makes mistakes, says the wrong thing, and you're going to get gently corrected and just carry on. She was lovely. I adored her. I adored that chat. And I wrote down my favorite thing that Patty Crowick said, which is, so what if we all just hung out on the edges that we've been shoved to and read each other's stuff and talked to each other? I want that on a t-shirt. I'd love that. And you know what? I got a review copy of this from Goose Lane Editions, which I'm looking forward to reading. And then, as a quote-unquote influencer, I got a whole bunch of independent books that had been nominated for book prizes in the second half of 2025. Just a huge stack. I'm going to be book hauling them eventually. So I have a second copy of Bad Indians Book Club, and I'm hereby launching a giveaway for the few people that are watching this couple minutes of the video. Enter your name for a draw for that second copy, and it's a finished copy. It's not a ARC or anything. And I will make that draw 2 weeks from today. So you can enter by leaving a comment here up to and including 6:45 p.m. Central Time on Thursday, November 20th. And I will mail it out. And if you live in Europe or UK, I will have to, just because it is going to be expensive to send it airmail, I will send it surface mail. I don't have a choice if it's North America. It will go airmail, and I won't have any money to send it until December 1st when I get paid again. But yes, I can't imagine why you wouldn't want a copy of this. It might change your life. In fact, based on how wonderful that chat was, I can almost guarantee it. I did post one video, and that was my chat along with Lindy with Douglas Bruton, the British writer who lives in the Scottish borders, of his penultimate novel, Hope Never Knew Horizon. I've had many, this is maybe the third long-form chat I've had with him, and most of them have been with Lindy, and this one I think just everything fell into place. It was just a wonderful chat. It's one of the videos I'm proudest of, and I know you never hear me say that, but it is. So check it out, and the novel is one of my top reads of the year. All right, I have finished 2, and the only reason I finished 2 is I forgot to tell you about one of them, and I'm going to be starting a bunch, and I'll have a wee mini check-in on kind of vibes from one that I've only read about 5 pages in. So this is the penultimate novella for the novella project with Barb Howard, and I had it finished last week, and I just forgot because I could barely remember reading it the second time I read it. I gave it as much attention as I felt it deserved, and I was as unmoved by it or bored by it, really, as I was the first time. Bartleby the Scrivener by Herman Melville. The only new thing I would add to what I had thought before, which was it didn't grab me at all. The humor didn't land for me at all. There was nothing to it. There was no message, which I don't need a message, but it just left me cold. Is that reading it now, it made me think of quiet quitting, which all you young'uns know all about, where people, they don't quit, but they only do the minimum, and they refuse to take on any extra work. And so I thought about quiet quitting as I read this, so I got a little bit more of a kick out of it about that. But otherwise, this, I don't understand why people think this is good. I didn't hate it, but who cares about it? It's stupid. So I read it much more positively, and I'm not going to say very much about it, but I did finish the second novel, and it is a short novel. I think it's about 220 pages maybe. I read it in ebook as an advance copy. The second novel by Allan Radcliffe, called Blurred Faces. I'm a huge fan of his debut work of fiction, The Old Haunts, which was published, I think, more than a year ago. But I began it in December last year and finished it in early January. And I have a full chat with him about that, which will be linked in the show notes. And now I have read his second work of fiction, which publishes next week on Thursday, Monday, November 13th. I read it early enough to interview Allan a couple days ago, and that interview will go live on the pub date. So you can watch for that on Thursday the 13th. And I thought it was great. It didn't knock me over the way The Old Haunts did, but it was still an excellent novel. 5-star read. And this one is about 2 single 40-something gay men in Edinburgh. One has lived his adult life as far away from Edinburgh as he could. Jordan is an ESL teacher, and for kind of family stuff, undealt with family stuff, he's kept his distance from his family of origin, and now he's in London, but he's taught ESL abroad, and he's just been a wanderer. And he's home to visit his straight brother. And he hooks up, uses Grindr or one of those hookup apps, and meets this other guy, Davy, who's lived in Edinburgh all his life. And in the post-coital phase of that assignation, Davy actually recognizes Jordan from school. He remembers him from school, and he not only remembers how bullied this guy had been, homophobically bullied in school, but that he had been part of the bully gang as a way of hiding his own sexuality from his peers. He had been one of the bullies. But Jordan, who he now remembers bullying, he doesn't remember Davy at all. And so that dynamic unfolds over a few days as they meet more often and things happen. And again, a beautiful, tender story. I'm not going to say any more about it. I highly recommend it. And watch for my full chat with Allan coming soon. All right, so in terms of vibes, I'm on page 10 of Afternoon Raag by Amit Chaudhuri. This is a buddy read with Jo. She's already checked in, but with the things that have happened in my life in the last couple of days, I'm behind. But I love the first 10 pages. And all I really want to say to you about it, because I've read so few pages, is to talk about that word in the title, Raag, because I didn't know what it meant. And I haven't really got enough into the story to know the role it's going to play in the story. But other versions of this word are raga, and this is to do with Indian music. And I love Indian music, and I know nothing about it. I just like to have it on, especially when I'm reading Indian literature. But I do really appreciate Indian music. And of course, is there anything such thing as Indian music? It's Bengali music, or Chaudhuri is a Bengali writer. I don't know how he's going to use this theme of the Raag, but what that is, I just read enough on this webpage. I might as well link that webpage. What is a Raag? It's at the foundation of Indian classical music, and I just read enough of it to just start vibrating, and it's hard to describe. The meaning in Sanskrit of the word Raag is something that colors your mind. Within Indian classical music, it has the power to create very specific emotions. A composition of sounds capable of bringing joy. There are rules for it. Only specific notes are allowed. The most important notes are Vadi and Samvadi. It's an improvisation, and you can look them up and listen to one. I did listen to one a particular Raag video when I was reading it, and I'm very curious to see how this writer spins a tale of literary fiction with this musical concept in mind. Okay, so very quickly, ridiculously, but because I have a schedule to keep and obligations to many lovely buddy readers and whatnot, I'm going to be starting 2 more novels. This is the last Elizabeth Jane Howard novel before her Kezilahabi Chronicles. I think that's how you pronounce it. This is the last one before they start getting it right. I'll be starting that, and I just realized I'm 2 minutes away. I have no time. So I got to finish. And then the next book for my Patreon book club is a novel from Africa. It's a Swahili classic. Is it translated? Yes, it is. Rosa Mistika by Euphrase, and I will look up the pronunciation later. I just realized I ought to be teaching on Zoom in literally 1 minute. It is translated from the Swahili by J. Boss Rubin. That's what it says here. We're going to be discussing this at the end of November. That's all I got time for. Thank you. See you later.